welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, produced in partnership with the A.B. Korkor Foundation for Mental Health. I'm Terry, the creator and co-host of this podcast. I've lived with depression most of my life, and I know how easy it can be to feel all alone in the experience. I'm not alone, and you aren't either.
And I'm Dr. Anita Sands, a licensed clinical psychologist and life coach with a number of my own diagnoses, all of which bring a certain amount of anxiety and depression along with them. There is great power in shared experiences. We share our own as we engage in intimate and candid conversations with our weekly guests, exploring different perspectives on and experiences with depression.
We keep it real because depression is real. We keep it hopeful because there truly is hope, in spite of what depression tells you.
Hi, Terry.
Hello, Anita. So, when discussing mental health in general, and suicide in particular, we often hear about the impact of our conditions on others. We need to control or hide our depression or anxiety, even grief, if we want to be considered good employees. We may be encouraged to disguise our sadness from our parents and or partners because it can be seen as ingratitude for the life that they have provided.
And when suicide is the topic, the idea that pain can be passed on to our loved ones is frequently brought up. Hold on. Think about your family, your friends. Your death would destroy your loved ones. And it's all true. Without a doubt, a person's mental health and their choice about how to treat or not treat and manage or not manage their depression does impact others. But we also need to focus on the depressed and suicidal individual and their lived experience. It's important to remember that we deserve to live lives worth living for ourselves, not just for others. And somehow that message often gets lost a lot in discussions.
Today's guest, Ari Cohen, started making that distinction in her own mental health journey after a therapist asked her who she was getting better for, and a light bulb went off. I was actually in a business meeting with her when she mentioned it, and as soon as she started talking, I said, I have so many questions. But I don't want to ask them until we're recording, so will you please share your story on our podcast? She said yes. Here now is Ari giving her voice to depression.
Hi, I'm Ari. I have depression.
Ari did not introduce herself like that, but she says there were years in her life when she might have.
Yeah, so I'm Ari Cohen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the programs manager with Families for Depression Awareness, and I'm a lot of other things. I'm an active community member. I'm active in the Jewish community. I'm a social worker. I'm a wife. I am a soon-to-be parent, first-time mom, long-time cat mom. And at the end of this list, I have depression. And it didn't always used to be at the end of my list. It used to be at the very beginning.
Really?
And maybe the only thing I ever said about who I was to people.
Really? So you defined yourself that way?
Yeah. When I was 11, I got this diagnosis, and it started because of intense body pain. So I was not an active kid. You wouldn't find me in the gym. So I had a sense that I shouldn't have this level of fatigue and body ache all over. So my mom and my grandma, who I lived with at the time, listened to me and brought me to the family doctor.
Ari says there was nothing remarkable about that appointment, which ended with, "Thanks for coming in, get some rest, I'll check in with you later."
But what I didn't know is that that doctor was calling my mom, and that based on what I was presenting with, it was likely something bigger than a physical health issue. And so they described and shared to my mom what they were seeing, which is that I had lost 10 pounds, and at 11, you should be growing, not, going in the other direction. I showed that I was really not interested in things. I was sleeping a lot more than usual. And I just was pretty numb to a lot of life. And the doctor wanted my mom to be educated before, having to tell me all of this. So that's where it really started.
That's a perceptive doctor. I think there got to be a lot of kids and adults who go to the doctor with symptoms that could be something very different than what they first present as.
Yeah, I'm really, really grateful. I still the doctor I see today, so I feel really lucky.
Oh.
And because of the severity of my symptoms, they moved towards antidepressants pretty quickly, which this is the early 2000s, so I don't think they would put a kid on antidepressants right away necessarily, but just due to how tough things felt or what it looked like, they decided to start me in that path.
It was a path that, within days, led to the hospital.
Now there's black box labels on antidepressants for children, which means that kids under a certain age are at more of a risk for suicidal ideation or thoughts. But at the time, that wasn't common knowledge. And so after taking the medication for 2 weeks, I had my very first suicidal thoughts. And I wasn't scared, but I told my mother and she was scared. And so this brought us to the emergency room.
Ari, who remember was just 11, and her mother waited and waited in what she describes as a cold, sterile room with a security guard outside the door.
But fortunately, after a few hours, I got to see a clinician who evaluated and educated us that it was likely the medication, and I was safe to go home, and we just kind of worked on changing medication from there.
When you say you weren't scared, did you think it was a side effect of the medication, or were you just like, wow, I've never had this before, I'm going to tell mom?
All of this felt like my norm, like quote unquote, it's just who I was. And again, I just embraced this label of depression. This makes so much sense for me. This describes who I am. And so it just didn't scare me because it was just something that happened. And luckily I was really close with the adults in my life and felt able to say, yes, I'm having this thought, this is what's going on.
Good.
So from there, I wasn't really getting better for me. I didn't know what getting better meant. I was just told, by doctors, this is treatment. I was also in therapy and doing a bit of that on the side. But I just was doing that because that's what I was told to do. But I also was told that I couldn't go to sleepaway summer camp if I had the severity of the symptoms that I was presenting with. And so I had this goal that I'm going to look better, do better, so I can go to summer camp. So it really kept things moving, but it wasn't always there to keep the depression away during the rest of the year. Eventually, summers end.
When her 14th summer ended, Ari started high school. She was still what she calls a pretty depressed kid.
I did my best, but it was pretty tough. There still wasn't, a good medication for me at the time, and therapy was only okay. And behind the scenes, my dad and I were really having a hard time. My parents are divorced. So going into high school with all these changes, it just was a lot. And 2 weeks into high school, I was deciding to try out for theater, put myself out there, still not a kid that goes to the gym or, exercises or plays in sports, but willing to try.
While waiting for the cast list to post, Ari was excited to see her older sister walk through the school doors.
But that excitement really quickly faded, and I saw that she was pretty serious seeming. And she said to me, I needed to get my things. I likely wasn't coming to school tomorrow, and we needed to leave. So all these alarm bells started going in my head. What is going on? Something is really wrong.
Ari's 24-year-old stepbrother and his girlfriend had died by suicide, leading to Ari making a commitment to herself.
That I would ask for help if I got to that point again, because I knew it was a place that I've been before. I just didn't ever want to see what I saw happen to the family because of me. I wanted to make sure I did everything I could so that they were spared the pain, just the devastation. So that was another sort of benchmark of, getting better, but not for me.
True to her commitment, a few years later, when Ari needed crisis-level intervention after a breakup that felt like the end of the world, she again told her mother. Instead of the emergency room, this time they went to a warmer crisis center for evaluation.
I, for the first time, met a social worker, and this is the first helping person I can remember asking me, what do I think would make it better? What do I think would help? And I said, I had never heard this. I didn't even really think about what she said. I just immediately spilled out, I want to meet other kids like me. I want to meet kids that have mental health conditions. I want to meet people that are struggling, because I really felt alone with it in high school. I felt like everyone else had it together, although I'm sure that's not the case. And luckily, she said we could do that there were outpatient programs. And so I was able to go to a program instead of school and meet with kids that were really having a tough time. And what actually was helpful is that these kids had it harder than I did. They had it worse than I did, and they were still here, and they're still in this room fighting for it.
It was not until her late 20s, when Ari entered a trauma-informed women's intensive outpatient program, that she was able to make the shift from healing, recovering, even living for others, to doing so for herself.
And there were two really hallmark moments for me in that program. The first is that they had us write a letter to our problems. And so, I chose suicide to write to. And I started to realize all these developmental milestones in my life, I was attaching to suicide in some way. And so I wasn't able to tell my life story without those hallmarks. It was really eye-opening for me in that moment.
One shift that helped her steer away from that narrative came from her second big lesson in that program.
And then at another group, the therapist said, who are you doing this for? Who are you here for? Is it you? And that was the first time I'd been faced with that question and really reflected, no, I've never been doing this for me. I've been doing this for, summer camp and Nate and my family and everyone else. And so that was a big shift for me of deciding, even if I really didn't feel it, because I didn't, I still was pretty depressed. And I still, a part of my depression is just really not liking myself and a lot of critical inner talk. But I was ready to at least try. I'm trying to feel like I am worthy of a life worth living, that I can, I can do this for me.
What is the difference internally when you're trying to heal and recover and live for yourself as opposed to somebody else?
Yeah, I think, the big piece for me was just not really believing that just because I was born, I was worthy of, positive things in my life. I tended to focus on the negative all of the time, and almost saw that as a positive characteristic trait of myself and bonded with friends about that, having morbid humor. I think recognizing that I could do it for me was a bigger motivation, that I wanted to get better just because I deserve to and not because I have to for other people.
So this message of doing these things for ourselves, does that make it easier or harder to do them?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, if I understand your question correctly. Motivation's a struggle with depression in general. I think when I am truly experiencing depression, that I need help. That no matter what, I need the help from someone. So even though I have intrinsic motivation to do this for myself, that I'm still, not alone with it, and I can ask for help. I also live with a chronic health condition. And so when those things are coupled, it is extremely hard to take care of the basics, and they can be a domino effect in a cycle for depression or the chronic health condition to flare up. I've also, done some wellness recovery action planning, where you start to learn what are the signs that I'm slipping. Yeah. And so noticing, if I start canceling plans, it's usually a sign that I'm maybe not at my best. And then if it continues and I'm not, making excuses not to exercise and I'm not cleaning my house or, those kinds of things, I start to realize it's time. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think doing it for yourself, there's more responsibility, but still keeping that door open that you're not alone in it.
It's a distinction worth repeating. Doing something for ourselves, including something as significant as managing our mental health, is not the same as doing it by ourselves.
Yeah, I was thinking how many of us are raised like, you need me to do something, I will do it. I need to do something for me, that might at least come second, which is what I meant by my question. It's just sort of sometimes I think that depending on how we're raised and depending on how we feel about ourselves, doing it for ourselves might actually be harder.
Yeah, we hear from caregivers all the time at Families for Depression Awareness that they come last. Mm-hmm. I'm always going to take everyone else's needs. You hear the oxygen mask metaphor. Yep. The one I like is you need to fill your gas tank because you eventually will run out and then your car will tell you that you've run out. And so I don't want to be stranded on the road with no gas. I don't want to put myself in a position where I can't be there for the people around me. So I think you can frame it in a way that helps it feel more like it's an action for others, even though it's really for you.
If that's more familiar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So advice for other people to just sort of nudge themselves in the direction of, I need to do this for me.
Yeah, that's such a nice big question.
It is.
So I think, making that transition looks different for every person. If you are doing it for someone else, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what keeps you going, you're still going. But I think to slowly start to identify other parts of you, if you're like me and your diagnosis became all encompassing and the symptoms are loud and they're hard. But one of the ways we can come back to ourselves is exploring things that we are passionate about and that we enjoy. And so, I wasn't going to synagogue. I wasn't reading books. I wasn't exploring hobbies. And so just making the decision to do gentle practices. I think learning about self-compassion is a practical way that people can kind of dig in a little bit of learning how to be kind to yourself and how to make space for yourself, because we all do make mistakes. We're perfectly imperfect beings. And, there's tools out there to help you uncover that. Journaling is really helpful, of uncovering narratives that you weren't aware of. Like the writing to my problem, I don't think I ever would have put that together if I articulated it, but seeing it on paper that I was owning so much of my identity to these things and not seeing the rest of myself really helped. So some gentle strategies that could help, but it's definitely not one thing. I can't say this will make it better. This will change the path.
So Terry, I love pretty much everything that Ari said in this episode, and I just love to focus on kind of that core thing that she came to believe, that she was a good person and she was worthy of good things, a good life and friends, meaningful work, experiences, fun, joy, pleasure, peace, all of those good things. And not just because it would make other people feel better.
Right.
If she had those things, it's okay to do things for yourself because you do deserve that.
Yeah. And I loved also the hand in hand that it was for ourselves, not by ourselves, because it can be so easy to think, okay, I'm going to shift this. I'm not going to get well for anyone other than myself. I'm not going to stay for anyone other than myself, or maybe it's not for them, but also for me. But that doesn't mean that we have to be isolated. We have to figure it all out ourselves, that we can't access resources that are available to us if we're lucky enough to have some available to us.
Yeah, I agree. And I also was just really impressed that, she at a young age, was able to verbalize that what she really needed when she was finally asked by someone, what do you think would help? And she really recognized being with people like myself who are going through this. That's what I really need. Yep. And I think that was so wise at such a young age to realize that. And again, it just goes back to hopefully what we see as the potential for positive power with giving voice to depression, which is this is your place. These are your people. This is the place where we understand all of this. And you can be with people who get it. So I really like that. She got that. She got that really young too. And kudos to the therapist for asking her opinion.
Oh, yes. It was a great question. If we're going to pass out kudos, her mom, I mean, to create an environment where your child comes to you when she first experiences suicidal ideations and says, hey, mom, I think, something's going on here. And then later, to come back again and say, okay, I'm in a crisis situation. And the mom says, yeah, we're not doing the ER thing. I make a couple calls, find an alternative. And they did. And
that warmer, more helpful environment.
Yes. I thought that there were a lot of really good lessons in it, and I'm very grateful to Ari for sharing them with us. One thing she brought up that is part of how she cares for herself is the WRAP plan, and WRAP is an acronym for the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And we're going to do the next 2 weeks, we're going to walk through that making of a plan for yourself, so that whether it's just the little things that we noticed, like yesterday I was driving rather aggressively and getting mad at everyone on the road, that's a warning sign. And it's just like, ooh, I got to pay attention to this because I know where it can go. To what you do in a crisis situation, who you call, who you want called, who you don't want called, where you want to go, where you don't want to go. All of those really important things that if we can have them spelled out from a good place, and with some help and some input, then when we're in a bad place, we don't have to suddenly be resourceful and figure it out. So
no, when your brain's not helping you.
Right. That's remember one of the guests we had said, it's hard to fix something broken with something that's broken. And it is so true. So for the next 2 weeks, we'll be going through the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, and we'll have a PDF that you can download. That'll be on with the episode, but also on our Facebook page and social media. So you can find that and fill it out with us.
That sounds great.
It'll be great to have a therapist to help us step through it as well. So thanks.
Well, I use them for my chronic health issues all the time. So that same thing. If I go into an acute state, then I don't have to rethink now, what do I need to be doing to climb out of this? Because I won't be able to think about everything. I won't remember everything that works. So I just make sure it's in one place and I can refer back to it. So I love these recovery action plans. I think they're fabulous. I'm so glad we're going to spend the time to do 2 weeks with it.
It's nice to know that they can be adapted because there's all sorts of things that can impact us. It's well known.
Yep.
Cool. All right. See you in a week.
Okay. We truly hope that our podcast brings a little more understanding, helps you better articulate and reflect on your own experience with depression, or better understand how to support someone else who is struggling.
If this episode has been of comfort or value to you, know that there are hundreds of others like it in our archive, which you can easily find at our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And remember, if you're struggling, speak up, even if it's hard. If someone else is struggling, take the time to listen.